Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Entropy podcast. I'm your host, Francis Gorman. If you're enjoying our content, please take a moment to like and follow the show wherever you get your podcast from. Today, I'm joined by Stephen O'Sullivan, a veteran in the cybersecurity game and the founder and CEO of Smart Cyber Group. Stephen has a deep expertise in cybersecurity, AI, quantum technologies, and today we're getting into the trenches to bring his perspectives to life. Stephen, great to have you here with me.
Thank you, Francis. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to have a good natter about the fields of quantum and PQC and AI and where we are and where we're going to be in the future.
I think Stephen, it's super topical at the moment, and I don't know how many papers I have seen come out in the last 2 to 3 months around quantum roadmaps, quantum readiness. We had the EU just land out their timelines, and high exposures closed off by 2030, with medium and lower exposures by 2035. What's your sense of that in terms of urgency for the world as a whole? Like that is going to impact every industry at every level.
Indeed, quantum's a complete industry and cultural and societal game changer. And when I see the timelines, 2035, 2030, I see these timelines coming down. And for me, I worry about the ability of organizations to be ready. There's a lot of hype, without any doubt. There's much hype, but there's a lot of truth about getting yourself sorted, and an organisation needs to take those steps. So personally, from the experience I've got, I think that those dates that we see, you mentioned the ETSI paper and the EU papers that came out recently. We're going to see these timelines coming forward. So I'm on the side of the fence that things probably 2 to 3 years closer than what we're seeing currently published, Francis.
2 to 3 years, that really creates pressure on companies to act now. And I know from my involvement in this field, the messaging is key. Companies are looking for a lot of money to enact change that hasn't been touched for 20 or 30 years. Crypto has been a it's not broken, don't fix it field for cybersecurity and technologists in many industries. How can organizations set themselves up for success here? Because they need to get buy-in, they need to know the problem. What would your advice be in that space, Stephen?
So I think we can answer this in a very general sense and say follow best practice by the NCSC, which publish various articles related back to NIST. We know from the United States, the White House, and the executive orders. We know there's a lot of recommendations. There's a lot of standards that are starting to come about. There's a lot of guidelines, but there's not any real regulatory pressure as such. We know the UK has invested £10 million in the National Quantum Strategy, which is tiny in actual fact. We know that some sectors are on the front foot. So if you imagine the space sector, the MOD and these organisations, they're kind of on the front foot. Then we come down to, if you like, the tier one banks and financial services, where they're already again starting to plan for this, because they realise, they remember back to Y2K 25 years ago, what happened there. And this is quite different, because with Y2K, we all kind of knew when it was going to be. But with Q Day, which is the often mentioned the equivalent of Y2K, it's kind of a bit fluid. It's not going to be a day, it's going to be a number of days or a number of years. And in truth, we won't probably know when there's a quantum, a cryptographic relevant quantum computer. It will probably be something in the basement of a government organization to start out with, and it may already be there with sufficient qubits. So these organizations, be they tier one banks or top level MOD space agencies, are probably already preparing. The areas that concern me are the mid level, the tier two and tier three sectors, whereby they haven't got the money, they haven't got the budget, they're grappling with AI, which has knocked them for six. They're grappling with compliance, they're grappling with technology refresh. How do they suddenly stand up a team to put in place a program of work which effectively is going to take years and years to do, when there is no real threat at this moment in time? So we have a conundrum here that each sector will have to handle, and the sort of governments of the world, and the UK government in this case, will have to start actually issuing mandates almost to sort of get things moving. So it's a very difficult piece of work. And aside from the financial side, which costs hundreds of millions of pounds, there's resources, there's the time, there's the impact on your services. So this is a tremendous piece of work to do. The benefits are fantastic in terms of the quantum computing and AI and bits and pieces. We can talk about that, but getting yourself secure now is no easy task.
I think it is two phase. It's the future applications that quantum can be used against, but the threat it therefore brings against today's cryptography. And I suppose just to frame for any listeners that may not be overly familiar with quantum and what we're talking about, because we did jump straight into the middle of it. I suppose we're talking about Q day as a point in time where quantum computing becomes commercially viable to distribute at a scale that becomes a threat to industries at large, and therefore delivering with it the ability to break asymmetric cryptography as we know it today, RSA, Diffie-Hellman, those types of things at scale and incredibly quickly due to the way that it processes information that is quite different to the ones and zeros that we're familiar with today in classical computing, as we call it, or today's computing. So even explaining the hypothesis of the problem is difficult, and we all know with things that are difficult to explain that sound futuristic, it leads to levels of procrastination. And when you look at the timelines for implementing cryptography and the amount of complexity, dependency mapping, application refactoring, etc., that will need to be done in this space, you're rocking up to your chief financial officer or your board and you're going, hey guys, I need X amount of million every year for the next number of years to do this thing that might happen, but I can't tell you when it's going to happen. It's a very hard sell.
It is, and the way that I've worked with this really, and you mentioned the asymmetric encryption and bits and pieces, far too complex for most boards and chief financial officers because that's not their field, right? So we have to revert back and we have to say, how does this truly impact an organization and its clients? So we're really, in most simple terms, talking about data theft and data loss. So there's a term called store now, decrypt later, harvest now, decrypt later, where your information or your bank's information or your logistic firm's information can be stolen and then they which will be harvested, sold on the dark web, etc. A file of 6 gig, 20 gig, whatever else, and effectively that data, which may have a long shelf life or may have a short shelf life, can then be decrypted in the background. Now, that is huge because you can imagine the brand damage that will do to any organization, financial services to one side, any organization, critical network infrastructure, supply chains, healthcare, pharmaceuticals. No one wants their personal information or their clients' personal information breached. There'll be massive implications for GDPR, privacy aspects. So, in simple terms, the organization needs to prepare now. It's almost like a super fast data loss prevention program. You're trying to ensure that if someone does steal your information, they can't decrypt it.
I'm going to use that line. I want funding for the super fast data leakage prevention program.
Well, indeed, it's a good one. And, effectively, this is initially, in the future, Francis, we cannot even imagine the power of quantum computing merged with AI. But in simple terms now, being able to protect your data, your IP, and that of your clients is the key program of work. And we have to kind of look at it in a way, not so much around the word quantum. We have to go right back to the encryption, the cryptography side, and the fact that you need to secure your information. And organizations have information in many, many places throughout their ecosystem. And it's about putting a program of work in place that protects that. So when I speak to board members and organizations, I try to bring it back to the data loss side initially and the financial implications of that.
One way, Stephen, that we could articulate this problem to those leaders is to look at lines of service within your business and equate that to long lived product life. So you talk financials there. So, people have mortgages that last for 30 years. They have loans that can last for 15 or 20 years. This is information that is still going to be relevant, potentially within the time frames that we get to Q Day, as we are calling it. So therefore, the relevance of that information is really important in terms of the risk that Harvest Now Decrypt Later poses. And I think it's when we start to reverse the messaging from deep cryptographic speak back into business language, and essentially align it with real world impacts, that it starts to get a little bit of flavor. But for somebody who is starting today to look at their quantum program, there's a number of steps. One is the communication piece. Can you explain this problem in an easy to understand way that your stakeholders can start to buy into the concept? Two is, do you know what your cryptographic inventory is? And we might just talk a little bit about cryptographic inventory now, because it's a core foundation to the next step, which is, what do I need to fix and what are my exposures, so that I can lay out the order of fix to reduce exposure in a way that is pointed, and I'm not spending money senselessly, and I can put structure on it, and I can be architecturally led in this space. So from a tooling perspective, or for somebody looking to collate a C-bomb, a cryptographic bill of materials, people may be familiar with software bill of materials. This is the next level of extrapolation to look at the cryptographic elements. When I know you're very familiar with this space, when you look across the market at the moment, what approaches or tooling are standing out to you, if any?
So there's two or three approaches. The first one is for an organization to make the most of its existing tool set. So they may have tools in place for vulnerability management, for digital certificate management, and they may have not use those to the full extent. So some organizations will try to extract as much information to derive their crypto assets. And let's explain what crypto assets are. Crypto assets are really all of your forms of encryption, symmetric, asymmetric, all in different types, be it in databases, in applications, in your code, in your appliances, firmware, your external TLS, or what we used to call SSL certificates, etc. So all of those crypto assets can be in some way, shape, or form discovered. They can be inventoried, and they can be risk assessed against if they're quantum resistant or not. Secondly, they can then be mapped, which is it's a little bit more difficult, but it can be done. It can be mapped to the applications that they're protecting or encrypting the information on, which therefore can be mapped to the business use and the end client use. So there's a whole number of vendors out there at this moment in time that are offering solutions, offering tools that will discover all of your cryptographic assets and produce, as you said, a cryptographic bill of materials, which is a super large file which contains all of the metadata of your cryptographic assets within the scope of the assessment. And organizations really need this, first of all, because you can't manage what you can't see effectively. And you have to consider an organization, not in terms of the perimeters of the organization, but upstream and downstream as well. So there are potentially hundreds of thousands of cryptographic artifacts or assets within a large organization. Identifying them is no easy task. Fixing them and upgrading those that are vulnerable is an even bigger task. But you've got to start somewhere, and you have to start with, you mentioned the executive committee and the awareness side. There comes a point where you actually need a tool to start to see where you are.
And then once you know where you are, you have to bring in your architectural teams and start to define exposure-based roadmaps to remediate from the outside in, so that you start to reduce those high risks. And I think if we talk about what those risks are, I think earlier we were talking, there's your external network, your internal network, applications, databases. Let me say anything?
Code
Is it all?
repositories.
Code repositories.
Yeah, I mean,
That was
there's
the
like,
broader one.
I mean, you can see it in the five pillars. So there's a model which sees your external cryptographic assets, which is your TLS certs, whether they've got vulnerable cipher suites in there or not. So, many organizations will start by looking externally at their primary domains and any other domains they've got, and starting to discover whether or not they're running a vulnerable TLS version. So 1.3 is a recommended PQC version. 1.2 is okay, but should be upgraded. 1.1 and 1.0 are not. And any SSL is a no-no. So initially, it's good to start to understand what you've got externally, because it's quick and dirty that you can find out where you are. Then there's the second stage, which is your internal systems. So you'll have a lot of TLS is an envelope. It will actually, so the presentation layer of the OSI model, it will carry all of your protocols, your SSH, your SFTP, all the other ones inside it. So in terms of an internal network, there'd be self-signed certificates, there'd be null certificates potentially, and there'd be lots of other TLS related traffic. Then on the pillar 3, you'll come to your internal IT systems, your hardware, your appliances, your bits of kit, be they routers, be they jump boxes or whatever else that have got some certificate in place as such. And then you can come to your code repositories where you've got all your source codes for your applications in there. And then you can come finally to your applications and databases and your key management systems and your cloud-based systems. So your cryptographic landscape across an organization such as a bank is immense. And it is, as we said before, hundreds of thousands of assets. And you've got to start identifying them ASAP.
Hundreds of thousands of cryptographic assets because you've got libraries nested within software
Indeed,
repos,
indeed.
applications, etc. It's a quagmire, and you do all of
A
that, but
good
then you
word,
need
France. It is a quagmire. That's a great word.
is I think it creates a vision of something else, but yeah,
Well, yeah. Some would say that it's similar.
similar. And I suppose, Stephen, from that you're great. I've done all this work. I've all this information. I need to make a start. When you start working outside in or wherever your highest exposures are, and you can target certain lines of business that are of a high impact to your organization, etc. But then you look at your vendor stack and your supplier stack, and the threat just is encapsulated and spread outside your organization again. So, what are your vendors doing? What are your third parties doing? Have you got technology agreements for technology refresh programs that are the accountability of one of your suppliers? Is that hardware going to be quantum ready? You need to get into those processes, etc. It's a massive,
Indeed.
massive piece of work when you
It
start
is,
breaking it down.
France is one of the ways I'm sure you've heard about is this enveloping approach, whereby you don't fix the underlying quantum PQC protocols and algorithms. You kind of wrap them up in a new envelope, and you make them PQC safe. And this is a quick win. You'll see there's organizations that specialize in this. But really, you've got to think about the extra latency involved. You've got to think about the fact that you've got an old car, you're just putting new wheels on it and some nice windscreen washers on it, but it's still an old car with an old engine, right? So, um, organizations are trying to work around the quickest, biggest bang for their buck, which is normal, right? People do not want to invest huge amounts of time and money at this moment in time until there's a firm mandate and regulation that says you must do it. And this has been the same for many standards, PCI over the years, etc. So as you said, the vast ecosystem of your supply chain and your vendors alone means you need immense resources in a large organization. You need a GRC program, you need ownership, you need executive committee, you need all of that wrapping around before you can even start the work. Because once you start to discover your assets and you start to see which of those are at risk, well, then it's almost then incumbent upon you to fix those. And this is where the work really starts, because this requires program and project management. It requires a liaison with all your cloud suppliers or your external suppliers. So a lot of organizations, and I have to say over the last 18 months, have adopted an ostrich approach, which is to put their head in the sand and kind of wait for things to come about. And I've had conversations where, CISOs have said to me, well, I'm not even going to open that Pandora's box. It's best I don't open it. I've got enough on with the compliance, with AI. I don't need to have quantum. And this is really dangerous because it means that you are exposing your organization for the sake of your own role and the fear of what's going to happen to threats that could result in huge financial penalties down the line.
And I think that brings us full circle back to what we said at the start. There's a real risk of decision paralysis in this space, and
Quantum inertia. Quantum inertia is a wonderful term. It means that Organizations want to do it, but they just can't move out of first gear.
I like that idea. I don't like what it means, but I like the I like the idea. So Stephen, look,
Quantum
I suppose
paralysis, quantum inertia.
I suppose touch on quite a bit there, but there is positives to quantum once you get your house in order. So when everyone's talking about AI at the moment, now let's say we're all swimming in red seas of AI. Everyone has a fear of missing out, and we want to do the same thing as everyone else is doing, but no one can really derive much value. Does quantum help solve some of these problems, or does it exacerbate it even more?
So the answer is both. I mean, it both breaks and bolsters. So if we think, Francis, 2 years ago, maybe three, none of us had ever really used a ChatGPT, a Perplexity, a Claude, any large language model in any way, shape, or form. Suddenly, it appeared from nowhere, and it's knocked organisations for six. There's shadow AI. There's people leaking information into LLMs. There's all sorts of things. So this has really, had a big impact on organisations along with their compliance side. In terms of the interrelationship and the intersection of quantum and AI, let's just step back. If we move away from the cryptography side of quantum computing itself promises immense benefits for society in healthcare, in drug. The power of quantum computing integrated and fused with the learning capabilities of AI are immense in terms of diagnosis, early diagnosis of medical conditions, in terms of your supply. In literally every part of organizations and society, at some stage, it may be 20 years away, our children's time it'll be a different world. There'll be a different internet. It's a game change in every way, shape, and form. Organizations like Google have already set up foundations, the sort of quantum AI, QAI foundations, whereby they're looking at how they can harness the power of quantum and AI for these purposes. And AI on its own is a offensive tool or a detective tool. So AI is used in many organisations to detect threats and what's happening and picked up in the SOC. But it's also in the wrong hands can be used. We know things like deep fakes and bits and pieces. It can be used as an attack vector. So you suddenly wrap that into quantum and you multiply the power of AI. I mean, we cannot even, sitting here now talking, we cannot even envisage the power of quantum and AI in the future. And in terms of AI, with AI, you might even find that it will actually switch your algorithms and your protocols for you in real time. So if you've got a super system in place and it's all integrated with your organization's cryptography, your AI may be able to fix and decide which are the best protocols at any point in time and self-heal the weaknesses that you have. So there are so much power in this. That intersection is not really. I mean, there's a lot of papers out there. There's a lot of organisations looking at things, but how it influences the AI side and how AI influences the quantum side is going to be immense. But alongside that, as we know, there have been negative impacts as well. So we're not just talking about the quantum cryptography weaknesses, but we're now moving and shifting right into threats and risks that are going to be immense, and we can't even think about in maybe 15, 20 years time.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm not overly familiar with the quantum use cases outside of kind of high frequency trading, etc. It's still a topic to explore. I spent so much of my mental capacity looking at the quantum readiness problem. I haven't looked past to the quantum benefit side of the house just yet, but it's on my to do list. So it is a fascinating area. In terms of artificial intelligence, Stephen, as you know, I feel like everywhere you look, every product now claims to be a derivative of some kind of AI or some extrapolation of a large language model that is doing something. And agentic is the new term. But we're seeing new and interesting attack vectors coming as well with the nesting of plain text on a white background to conceal instructions that are either there to mislead the user into clicking on a phishing link or into carrying out destructive actions off the back of an agentic task list, etc. Where do you think artificial intelligence is going? To me, it seems like it's become the Wild West. Everybody feels the need to be some way involved, but nobody's really thinking of the downside to all of this. And I think I was encapsulated for me a couple of weeks ago when MIT released a 200-page report talking about cognitive impacts in stage two thinking for users that started a task. I think the study group was students. One cohort did their assignments without the aid of technology. The other cohort fully used ChatGPT in this case. The neural connections were almost didn't exist in the cohort that used ChatGPT from the start. So I have a real worry about human resilience and the ability for critical thinking to be diminished within organizations if we just throw these tools out. And I kind of want to get your view on the kind of threat side and the human impact uh, that we're seeing off
Yeah,
the back
yeah.
of
I
it.
mean,
If you have a perspective there.
yeah, I saw your paper that you posted on LinkedIn about the hidden words in documents. This Chat GPT brain, for want of a better term, is real. I speak to many people who mark assignments. I used to work at university. The mark assignments from students that are 85, 90%, LLM generated. And as you know, there's tools in place to detect that. But the genie's out of the bottle. Okay. So, you can imagine a young person these days just starting secondary school. They've got their mobile phone. In our days, we would have to go to a library. We would look at books and papers. We'd take photocopies. We would go back and we would then write out, and we would apply critical thinking. If you then move this forward to the speed that the market wants and the way people are, there's the ethics side, there's the transparency, there's the trust. Of the EU AI Act as an example, and there's many standards and many people shaping up the AI side. And it worries me a lot. I've got a little granddaughter who's 3 years old, and you can imagine, when she's at school, will she even use a pencil? Will she even write anything? And how will this affect the neural and cognitive functioning of how people work? And then you can move that forward into organizations, and organizations that really want to reduce their cost and to make things super fast. And they will take the easiest route and the fastest route. And we know agentic AI, chatbots and agents, and we know they're going to get more and more clever. And apart from the societal impact, which is huge in terms of potential jobs, is AI. I mean, I did a conference in London 2 weeks ago on AI and the supply chain, and the impact of that. And if you think when the Amazon guy comes to your house, where that the supply chain back, all the digital touch points, the AI is both a friend and a foe. But we know from history that we kind of very rarely learn from history. It's just the way it is as human beings. We repeat the same mistakes. And it worries me that, I see people who I work with that send me papers. So I've just written this paper and they've just run it through one of the LLMs, no names mentioned. And it's just so obvious. And if you then move that forward into our organizations are going to use that in HR, in finance, in procurement, in supply chain, in cyber, you've suddenly got people that are relying on AI, and they're relying on AI to such an extent that it's taken over their life. You suddenly add in the power of quantum computing, and it's a massive game changer in ways that we can't even imagine.
I think I wrote about this a while back on LinkedIn, and I used the phrase, "We're creating a new form of asbestos, digital asbestos." And
Indeed. Yeah.
the whole point I was trying to make with that argument is a lot of these tools accredit the outcome to the license holder and don't create a variation that shows that they were actually generated by the artificial intelligence itself, the generative AI tools. In ChatGPT, if you look in the property section, you'll see a Python marker as the order, and then you can know pretty quickly that it's generative AI. But if people are copying and pasting content from within the tool and then putting it into a document, or creating a document and saving out a different variation of it, etc., those markers get diluted over time. And we're ending up with all of this almost synthetic data that has a certain amount of theater around it that is pertaining to be something, but it could be full of garbage data or infactual statements, etc. And Stephen creates that document. I go, that's a great source, and I point my agent at it or my generative AI tool at it, and I suck it in, and I create a derivative of that, and then let's look at Francis. That's a super thing, and then someone else does it. You lose all provenance and lineage of the source of truth that it was that data. And if you move that
Absolutely.
idea out of the internet back into an organization, you're going to have so much garbage data. Will organizations be able to say, we roll out this massive AI program, we gave all of our users AI, 18 months' time, what's actual artificial intelligence generated, what's human generated, what's garbage? I think there's a real problem there.
I think the answer is, Francis, the good ethical organizations that adopt good AI practices will have some control over that provenance side, but there'll be many, many, many that will not. And as you just said, that is a massive dilution. Everything changes in every way, shape, or it changes the whole culture and the ecosystem, and every trust element of an organization is now eroded. And I can't see an answer because we know that, organizations, some are much more ethical than others, and some just want to make a quick buck. It's a loose cannon. It absolutely is.
It is a loose cannon, and I think the next problem that we're going to see is your ability to interact with the prompt engine and the outcome you get. So I've seen a number of studies, and Louise McCormack that was on the show a couple of months back, we spoke about this after it, and it's that you get different outcomes based on your ability to speak the natural language of the model. So if I am a native English speaker and you are not, my outcome is far better than yours because my structure and my context and my understanding of English as my first language allows me the ability to create prompts that are more accurate, more pointed, and more concise. And what that potentially means is you have somebody that is using artificial intelligence beside you in the workforce that is getting better outcomes and maybe getting graded in terms of bonuses or performance ratings, etc., at a higher standard, but you are far more capable. And it creates this ethical question around bias within an organization. And like I think all of these conversations are not being had, and we need to start getting them out there so public discussion can.
And you know, possibly quantum AI and the way that that is being shaped up, it's not just theoretical. That maybe that is the answer. Maybe that is a solution. Maybe and I know it's a subject that not many people have looked into yet. But there's a lot of good information out there now. A lot of organisations are trying to do is maybe, fingers crossed, that the evolution of quantum and AI will actually make the weaknesses in AI better. We shall see.
We shall hope. We shall hope, Stephen. Look, Stephen, I think we were nearly up on time, and it's been a really insightful conversation. Hopefully, not extremely technical for the listeners at home, but I'd really like to get people's views and opinions and start conversations off the back of this episode, especially if we can get more people thinking about quantum readiness and the preparation that they need to enact in that space. It would be fantastic. And I have more series coming up with different speakers in the coming weeks in the quantum space. So it's a topic I'm going to follow through for a little bit for anyone who is interested. Even it's been lovely to have you on, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to speak with me
Thanks,
today.
Francis. It's been a great, open, free flowing discussion. I think we've covered quite a lot, and it's an area that we both know is not going to go away. So the more people talk about it, and the more discourse and debate, and the more sharing, the better for everyone.
Excellent. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Francis.